A lot of important details that we got to discuss right now. I'm back here with Judge Ashley Willcott. Now, let's first start. I'm curious, I haven't had a chance to speak with you. How do you think from a general perspective she did on the stand? Because she is the prosecution's star witness.
Well, first of all, if you compare her testimony this time to the co-defendant's case, which was heard this summer, she's much more emotional in this case. So I think she sounds a little more convincing, so to speak. I question her testimony because of some inconsistencies and things that really don't make sense in terms of her answers to me.
What do you mean, that the passenger was 8 feet tall? No, that was just a mistake.
I got the giggles, right? So that's just an honest mistake and meant 2 inches, not 2 feet. But there's some other things, Jesse, that I think you would agree are really questionable. I
want to talk about the solo cup. I know. We keep talking about this, but we have to, right? So she says that he was holding a solo cup. When you look at the crime scene, there appears to be a beer bottle, because that's what Armando Baptista said, that Muhammad was holding a beer bottle. When investigators first looked at the crime scene, they didn't see a solo cup at first, and then they saw the solo cup the next day. At least that's the testimony of one of the detectives. So what is a jury supposed to believe? Was there a solo cup or a beer bottle in his hand?
I mean, that's the problem in this case, Jesse. The testimony is there are a lot of inconsistencies. And so I do think there's an argument to be made by the prosecution. He had a solo cup, a red cup, and it was found away from the scene. It was when they went to recanvass further out from the immediate scene that they found it. And so that adds weight to the credibility of the statement that he had it in his hand. And then when the passenger of the car threw the punch, if you believe her testimony, that cup probably went flying and landed far away.
Look, it's impossible to know what she's going through because she was right there. But you made an interesting point that her demeanor is different this time around, that she's more emotional. Why do you think that is? And especially considering the fact that, you know, if she testified in an earlier time, you would imagine her to be more emotional then than now. But again, who am I to judge?
Right. So, you know, the cynic in me says, well, the prosecution prepped the witness better this time. So I don't know that that's the reason, but I guess, too, the stress on her of having to give a statement the night of, possibly have been deposed, testifying at a trial of a co-defendant this summer, now testifying again. It was a boyfriend of 2.5 months. No matter what we see happen in this trial, the reality is she saw him stabbed to death, and she was there with him when he died. So all of that trauma and stress could be the reason that she is this emotional.
Yeah, could very well be the case. And listen, we're going to be back live in that courtroom tomorrow, but we are talking about a lot in this case. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, a lot more of a further discussion involved with the issues in this trial. We'll be right back. Okay, beer bottle, solo cup, that distinction still becomes huge. I'm back here with Judge Ashley Willcott. Now, when you listen to the perspective of Armando Baptista, you know, we saw kind of a flavor of what his defense would be if he took the stand, because we actually saw in the courtroom, you know, his interview with the authorities about acting in self-defense. Does it make sense, his version of events? Because the prosecution is very clear to say that he and Elder were the aggressors here.
I think it does make sense, to be honest. I feel like there are two different stories. You have one eyewitness, who's the girlfriend, Wendy Gonzalez, saying this is what happened. And now from the defendant's perspective and the co-defendant perspective, who's already gone through trial, you have another version, beer bottle versus red cup, for instance. And so I actually think both of the scenarios make logical sense. I don't know which one happened, and the jury's going to have a tough job, I think, deliberating and figuring out who they thought was credible and which version of events is really the one that happened.
Listen, these cases are tough to sit on a jury for. You know, you're sitting on these cases, it's not easy. But self-defense trials, very difficult. But in case you haven't seen it, it's really important to talk more about that beer bottle or that solo cup. And we saw the testimony of Officer Melanie Peluso from the Miramar Police Department, and she is going to talk about how that beer bottle was found. And remember, if you're sitting in the prosecution's case, they really don't want to talk about that beer bottle. Take a look. All right, now I'm confused. Okay, Ashley, there appears to be a solo cup and a beer bottle. How is this possible? How is this possible that they're both there? And, I mean, you have two different versions of what happened. Again, I'm sitting in the jury. I'm confused.
Well, remember, it's dark. It's probably chaotic. They had all come from a party where there was admittingly drinking and partying going on. Who's to say that, for instance, the driver of the car didn't have the beer bottle and threw it out of the window? Or perhaps the passenger, who's the defendant in this case, had the beer bottle and tried to hit the one who's now deceased. We don't know. So I think they're both things, the red cup and the beer bottle, but we don't really know who had which thing. Maybe the passenger had the red cup and it flew out of his hand when he was hit by the one who's now deceased. That's the problem, Jesse. We don't know, but it does make sense they're two different things because there are three people who were there.
Now, Ashley, we only have about 10, 15 seconds left. My question is that enough to raise reasonable doubt?
I think so.
Yeah, I mean, because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to figure out, was this self-defense? And when you saw Baptista in his interview with the DA explaining that he felt that there was a threat to him and that there was that Muhammad Knight was on something, he started to cry at the table in the courtroom. This is a really emotionally charged case. But when we come back, we're going to switch gears and talk more about the Nicholas Godejohn case starting tomorrow. Stay tuned. All right, we all love a good cross-examination, so I'm back here with Judge Ashley Willcott. Now, they are picking at certain points. How fair is it, though, that she doesn't remember certain things, but other things? I mean, this is a fight. This is an altercation, right? In your experience, people that recount these instances, it might be tough to remember these kinds of minute details.
Absolutely it is. And I think the longer it goes on, the more your memory can get distorted. It was dark. It was chaotic. There was a fight. It was a kind of a messy night. So I think it's fair that she doesn't remember details. I think it's how she delivers that, though, in some of her testimony. I think if she would just say, look, I don't remember. It was dark. I was worried. I didn't know what was going to happen. It might be a little more credible than it seems like every time she gets a question on cross, she seems to say, oh, wait, no, not that.
So where do you think the defense really hit a key point there? Where do you think their strongest aspects were in that cross-examination?
And I'm just looking down at my notes, Jesse. So a couple of things that I think were important is that, you know, when he came away from the car, she didn't even know that he was hurt. Her testimony is he was angry. He was, you know, not happy. He was yelling at me. He'd been stabbed, and she didn't even know it. So to me, that lends to the self-defense theory. He was acting like that towards the passenger of the car. The passenger was defending himself, and all it did was continue to aggravate the now deceased, who was actually the aggressor. I think they can use it to make that argument.
Ashley, one of the things that you had mentioned earlier was trying to compare her testimony now in the Baptista trial to how she testified in the Elder trial. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to play her testimony from the Elder trial, and let's compare it and see how she did, because I'm going to tell you right now, there are some discrepancies. Things are not entirely the same, and we'll ask why. Let's be right back, right after this break. All right, we don't always get this, to have a witness testify 2 times and be able to compare the testimony. So back here with Judge Ashley Willcott, we're looking at how she testified in July. You said there were differences. I'm curious what they are, and I got to ask you, would there be a difference? Part of the reason from the prosecutor, we're talking about 2 different prosecutors, 2 different lines of questioning, 2 different styles. Is that a reason we see some of this discrepancy?
Maybe. That could be. Maybe because they obviously didn't ask the exact same questions. I don't know. I want to point out again, though, to me, she just looks much more relaxed and younger, so to speak, and less emotional when she testified in this previous case in the summer. And then she looked a little more stressed out and tearful and upset on this current Baptista trial. So it's going to be interesting to see what that means. But Jesse, some specific things in terms of what she said differently. In the very first trial, for instance, she said he was holding the red Solo cup. He moved it to his left hand. He extended his hand to shake the hand, and the passenger threw the punch. In the very first trial for the co-defendant that happened over the summer, her testimony was a little different, looking at my notes again because I wanted to write it down. down. And in that case, she said Muhammad approached the car. The passenger was approaching him. He turned to walk back to the car that she was in, which was the second car behind the other car, and that he turned his body to go back and extended his hand at that time, and that he actually threw a punch and hit the passenger, the defendant, in the face. So I don't know if it's because of how the questions were asked, but at two different scenarios.
Yeah, it's fascinating to watch. And while it's fresh in everybody's mind, you just saw her testify in July. Let's see how she did when she testified this time around. Clearly very different this time around. But Ashley, I gotta ask you something. You said before, the cynical aspect of you, that maybe she was coached. Maybe the prosecution said to her, hey, this time around we need to change something up. Would that be the case because Demetrius Elder, his co-defendant, was not found guilty of manslaughter but the lesser charge of culpable negligence? Would that be the reason that they would say, hey, listen, we got to do something different this time around?
Yeah, I thought, Jesse, interestingly, that the testimony we just heard from the first trial, I thought was more convincing to me than the one that we're currently hearing in Baptista.
Is that because of too much emotion, or showing emotion can be problematic?
I think it's that, but I also think as we watch and rewatch her testimony, there are just so many things, like what doesn't make sense. For instance, as she testifies at Baptista's trial that they were the second in line at the stop sign. Why didn't you drive off? Why didn't you go away? Well, we couldn't do that. It's a stop sign. That's the law. You have to stop. It just, some of her testimony just didn't, to me, feel genuine.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to talk about with her and this case in general. So, Ashley, stand by. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll have a further discussion about the Armando Baptista trial. All right, Ashley, so we found out that there is blood and glass from a beer bottle inside the car of Armando Baptista and Demetrius Elder. What does that tell you?
Somebody was hit or hitting with a beer bottle. But think about this. You know, there's testimony that nobody disagrees with, that the now deceased was on top of Baptista, who's the defendant in this case, in the car. So who's to say the defendant in this case didn't have a beer bottle and actually hit the now deceased over the head? The problem is we don't know who did what with that beer bottle. But I completely agree with you, Jesse, whether there was a beer bottle or a red cup in the now deceased alleged victim's hand makes all the difference in the world.
Well, Wendy Gonzalez, the girlfriend, says, look, Muhammad didn't even like beer. And I didn't see him holding a beer bottle, so what's the jury to think?
You know, the jury's going to have to decide. And again, Jesse, I think this is a really difficult case for a jury because there's so many what ifs and so many scenarios that I think are plausible, and one could be self-defense and the other isn't at all. So it's going to be, I think, tough for the jury to decide. Yeah,
and listen, Demetrius Elder, manslaughter charge, but found guilty of culpable negligence. So we really didn't see that one happening. Who knows what will happen in this case, but I do know one thing, and that's Ashley Willcott, Judge Ashley Willcott, thanks so much for coming on. I know we have to sign you off, but really, you're fantastic this whole morning, so thanks for being on with us. Of course. Now, when we come back, we're going to talk about the Nicholas Godejohn trial. And with us, a very special guest. Stay tuned here on Law and Crime.